the first Mayor Daley used to call me down to his office to talk to me about various problems. And I went down one day after he'd invited me, and he was in talking with a group of young people. He came out, he said, "John Hope, I didn't know you were here." He said, "I've been talking to some young 8th graders." He said, and they haven't gone. Would you just come in and say a word? I said, "Yes." And so he said, "Boys and girls, you remember this day, you're going to have a chance to hear from one of our outstanding historians," and so forth and so on. And he went on with a long introduction. He said, "Now, John Hope, say something say something historical to these people." And I was stumped for a moment, but it reminded me, Camille, of what you asked me to say something visionary. And I don't know that I can.
When I was 6 years old, my father, feeling that Rennersville, the village in which I was born, was not viable and would not ever permit him to move to the status that he thought he should move as a lawyer, moved then to Tulsa, Oklahoma, a much larger city, bustling, hustling, growing, and which was very prosperous in the 20s. We were all ready to go and to have a new life. And that's when the race riot engulfed Tulsa, and the entire black section of Tulsa was first looted, then burned and bombed. And when we finally got to Tulsa in 1925, 4 years after the riot, you still saw scars of the riot everywhere. Churches were right above the basement. There wasn't a finished church in that part of town. And the schools, except for Booker Washington High School, which I attended and from which I graduated some years later, Booker Washington High School was the only school that was standing in the black community. And everyone, though, rolled up his sleeves and did what they could to recover. Those were discouraging events, some of which I understood at the time, and some of which I did not understand. My father was a greater optimist than I am, and he thought that I was too young to be so lacking in hope for the future. And I said, "Well, you're so romantic. You're just full of imagination, and you're soft." I called him all kinds of names like that. We had a wonderful time arguing these points. And I was more restrained because I said, well, maybe some people will believe it. And some people will be changed by what I expose. I've been working in this area long enough to know that when you touch a question of race in the United States, you touch a raw nerve, and therefore it's going to be a problem. I was not daunted by that, although it was a daunting task. I was not discouraged, and I was not running away from it because it was going to be a difficult task. Tasks are difficult, but they're worth doing. Every time you take a deep breath in this country, they will say, well, blacks breathe this way and whites breathe that way. Or whatever you do, it is interpreted in terms of race. We were brought to realize that there was no time in our history, in the 300+ years of our existence, there was no time in our history when race was not a very, very important, significant factor. When I was 7 years old and living in a village in Oklahoma, my mother and my sister and I took the train from that village to a town 6 miles away, Shakota, where we did our shopping. We flagged the train, it stopped, we got on. And it started immediately. And the conductor came back and said, you can't sit here, this is for white people.
She says, well, I can't move my children while the train is moving. If the train were not moving, I'd be glad to move. He said, I'll stop the train, and he did, and he put us off. Instead of letting us go to the so-called black coach, he put us off. And when we got off and started trudging our way back to the village where we lived, I began to cry.
Because I anticipated going to Shakota, and I'm out in the woods. And my mother said, what's the matter? What are you crying for?
I said, that man put us off the train. She said, you shouldn't ever let that bother you. She said, that's a mere law that says that you can't ride with white people. But you're as good as any of the white people on that train or anywhere else. And I don't want you to spend your energy and your time worrying and fretting about that.
The night before I received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, I gave a dinner party at the Cosmos Club. I have belonged to the Cosmos Club since 1962. I'm the oldest African-American member of the club. I was the first African-American member of the club, I should say. And, well, it was a festive occasion that I'm going to get the Medal of Freedom, so I gave a dinner party at the club. And I was showing, at this point, I was showing my friends, some of whom had not ever been to the club, around in the club. And we got up to the library, and they were very interested in the library. And I realized that there was a member of the club, member of my party who had not yet come. And so I was going down the stairs, the grand staircase, to ask, to see if I could find this person. And when I reached the bottom of the stairs, this woman came up with her hat check and said, here, go and get my coat. And I said, madam, if you will present that to one of the attendants at the club, one of the uniformed attendants, and all of the attendants at this club are uniformed, perhaps you'll get your coat. And I walked away from her. And that was the last. I didn't have indigestion because she did that. I simply said, that poor old woman.
You see, because my mother and my father both were people who believed in high standards of education, high standards of conduct, and that sort of thing, so that I wasn't free to be bitter or anti-white in the presence of my mother and father. I simply was not. They would not stand for it.
I always believed that education was a great instrument to try to rectify the ills of society. And I was going to be an educator. I was going to teach this society something about itself that it might not know.
I think we can get it right then by knowing our history and knowing what to avoid. But that's not enough. We have to be creative enough. We have to be imaginative enough. We have to be tolerant enough to be willing to move in the direction of first freeing ourselves of any prejudices and misconceptions, and then of freeing others